Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Go Fast, Grow Fast, where we talk about people in the trenches growing companies, how they're doing it, what's working today, what isn't. I've got another great guest today. Brandon, welcome. I'm so excited.
Why, thank you, Sean. It's awesome to be here.
Why don't we kick things off by introducing yourself? Who are you? Why are people listening to you today?
Yep, sounds good. So my name is Brandon K. Richard. A little about me. As you also can see, I love talking about all things business, branding, and marketing. I also love to travel and getting lost in new places. I'm a big foodie, and I'm also a huge anime nerd. So I operate as a fractional CMO and e-commerce director, specializing in SEO and CRO, and my approach leans heavily into psychology and data. And as for my background, my path into marketing was about as unorthodox as they come, and like you, have worn several different hats over the years. I graduated from Clemson University, go Tigers. My degree is actually in architecture, and I minored in psychology. But I ended up doing a design internship for WordPress after graduating and started managing websites on the side. I've also worked in the events agency, designing for large tech brands, including Fortune 500 companies and some of the biggest in the world. And I've spent several years as the e-commerce webmaster and designer for one of the top medicinal mushroom brands in the US. And I've come to realize that the same thing that attracted me to architecture is ultimately what brought me to marketing. And that was the blend of kind of left brain and right brain thinking, science and art, and kind of data and creativity. And because of my background, I started to realize that there's actually a lot of similarities between designing for the physical world and the digital world, and that the digital world actually takes a lot of cues from the physical world. For example, the bottom of a building has footings, and the bottom of a website is a footer. Cities have navigation, and websites have navigation. Highways have banners, websites have banners. And I found that it ultimately comes down to understanding people and psychology, and that's really what serves as the foundation for a lot of my fractional work now, helping founders and leaders of growing e-commerce brands to identify, attract, and convert their ideal customers.
That's a lot to unpack in like 30 seconds. That was really great. So let's dive. So let's start with the psychology aspect of it. Let's unpack that a little bit. What does that mean? What are you looking at from that psychology perspective, and how does that apply?
Yeah, so a big part of where I always start is I always ask if there's a brand strategy or brand guidelines, and a big major component of that is personas. And for personas, I like to lean heavily on psychology, especially when it comes to like the psychographic information, and then also the needs and obstacles. And something that I leverage quite a bit there is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which kind of describes the progression of needs for an individual. And when crafting personas and kind of aligning benefits and features and all of that kind of stuff, making sure we're starting with a real like use case of this is an actual human need and not fabricating those in order to fit the benefits and features of the product. So it's really taking a kind of foundational approach and starting to think about the actual people behind the products, the people that are going to be coming to the websites, the people that are seeing your emails, your ads, etc. And what do they value? What are they interested in? What struggles are they having? And how does that apply not only to your products, but just in general? And how are you actually supporting them in their journey and in their goals? And so really understanding people, no matter what the business type is, and really no matter what the type of design or marketing, it all comes down to understanding people and how we navigate the world and how we perceive things.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you also talk about, so you mentioned SEO and CRO, right? And that both of those have a heavy data component to them. How are you approaching data? What actually matters? What data is valuable these days? Because I feel like we're inundated with it, and people struggle to understand what any of it means.
It's a very question, and I've definitely run into situations where data is being collected for the sake of collecting data. Like once like big data became a thing, it was like a lot of companies just got to this place of like, all right, we need to just aggregate all this data. And they're like, we don't know what to do with this. Like it's too much information to actually make any sense of. And so Psychology actually helps to pull out and extract insights. There's several different frameworks I use. There's one called like the Six Minds that goes into the different things that we tend to pay attention to, everything from wayfinding to memory to visual attention to language. And those are things that when I'm looking through data that I tend to try to pull out and extract. Another big thing to keep in mind is it's like important before even starting to like track and aggregate data to sort of know what threads that you want to pull on and at least have sort of these hypotheses or theories that you want to try to investigate through the data and kind of confirm or deny. So it's not always knowing what's the right data or what's correct, but rather just knowing what you're looking for. And by having just clear goals, like what are you trying to accomplish, like what metrics actually matter, what KPIs are actually going to be relevant, that really helps to figure out, okay, what do we need to pull just from like a revenue standpoint in order to put into the data? And then when it comes to like one of the big questions is always what kind of data supports personas and all of that kind of stuff. And how do you pull that information from all of the different CRMs and analytics tools and all of that kind of stuff and start to make sense of it? And that's really where I use several different psychological cues as kind of a framework in order to figure out, okay, what feels like it's important? What do we need to investigate? And then can we A/B test to either confirm or deny this? So it's really a filtering process of starting with the large aggregate of data and then starting to pull little threads to try to see, okay, is this important or is it not important for this particular business and this particular audience? And then just kind of having an iterative process where we kind of revise that over time.
I think that iterative process of understanding data is really important because, I mean, you can make data say just about anything you want it to. Like, two people can take that same data set and they can make it say two completely different things because there is so much data and it's just all about which pieces you choose to focus on. But that iterative process is the part that proves whether you're right or not. You know, it's like, all right, this is what I think the data's saying. You run that A/B test, like you said, and that confirmed or denied it. It improved or it didn't improve based on that theory. And then there's like no way around it. And that's kind of, I think, one of the challenges with everybody who does the free audits. Like, that's such a sales tool of we're going to do a free website audit for you and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, anybody can do that and just put it into their framework and say, here's all the things you've done wrong. But none of that knows whether you did that on purpose, whether you were making a conscious trade-off for something else. Is that, sorry if that's your main sales tool is doing free audits, but it's just something I see a lot out there. I'm wondering if you run into the same sort of thing.
Yes, definitely. To the point where I actually get requests for it. Sometimes it's like, oh, can you actually do an audit or an SEO audit or a CRO audit and like see where we're at? And I normally just ask to take a step back. Again, it's like, yeah, I just tell them like, honestly, I could look at your data and tell you have all these flaws and these issues that I will be the one to fix and yada, yada, yada. But it's like, ultimately, unless I know what your brand strategy is and what your goals are and who your audience is, I don't know what's right or wrong. I don't know what's good or bad per se. Yes, there's some things that are like universally not great if you see them in your analytics, but a lot of it is really subjective and really depends on what exactly you're trying to accomplish and what the business model is, what your margins are,
Right.
like what products need to be selling, which ones you need to lean more heavily on, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's definitely something that I run into quite a bit, and I normally just try to push back on it and say, like, maybe later in the process, once we start to figure out, kind of doing some gap analysis about like, where are you currently, and then figure out, okay, where do you want to be? Like, where are the gaps in that? Then we can do an audit that kind of specifically focuses on those things if it's even necessary.
Right. Yeah. No, if I open Google Analytics and it shows there's no web traffic, I can pretty much tell you there's something wrong, but that's not that helpful.
Yep.
Can you maybe walk through maybe like a concrete example of persona work and how that applies, within e-commerce, like how you're using that work to inform it? And, you don't have to, name names or anything, but, give people a little bit more understanding, because I think a lot of marketers even, but also founders, they have this idea of what a persona is. And it's like, yeah, it's Sally who likes to walk her dog on Sundays and, buys expensive purses. And like, that's a persona to a lot of people. So can you maybe fill in what is a persona to you? What does that actually look like, and how is it useful?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess for starters, I usually start with what kind of methodology we want to use for determining what the personas are. So depending on the company and how far along they are, it means different things. Sometimes it's like if you have different locations, the personas might be based on different locations, at least for starters. If you have several different product lines that fall within the same vertical, you might have different customers for each of those. If you have like a B2B and a D2C, you might have different personas for those. So it might be your most common customer, it might be the one you want more of, it might be the outlier. So it's figuring out, okay, what are, at least from a starting point, what are the personas that we kind of want to focus on and how are we going to utilize those? Which ones are actually the most relevant to your marketing efforts? And that usually comes from what the overall goals are. From there, I usually include 5 categories in my personas, demographics, psychographics, and then needs, obstacles, and the last being touch points, which is one I kind of added in later. And I know there's a lot of debate over the usefulness of demographics. I actually find it really useful just to help the client think of the personas as real people. People have those kind of characteristics, and it's not about like stereotyping or saying that everybody who fits this demographic does this thing. It's just saying that logically somebody who fits in this demographic could do this thing. So I do think that's just important to kind of think about personas as real people. And that's the main lesson I try to drive home as when I'm starting a project. It's like, yes, these are hypothetical, but they represent your real customers. And we need to start thinking about the actual people behind this. The psychographics are probably the most interesting. I feel like that's where a lot of people get into sort of the weeds and don't really know what to include there. And really that comes down to the business as well. And this is actually something where I've found AI to be quite helpful. Being able to ask about psychographic information, getting a bit of it, and usually depending on where that comes from, if it's a company that's been operating for a while, they usually have some data to substantiate it. If it's a company that's earlier on, then we usually have to kind of hypothesize and then support that with data and kind of come up with a theory and say, is this true or is this not? And so the psychographic data, I like to have a conversation with AI and just figure out like, what are your interests? Like, what are the things you like to do? And I start to feed it little bits of the customer profile as we're building it out. So it's like, okay, if we have the demographics, I might feed it that, and then a little bit of the psychographic information and say, what are some additional things you might be interested in? What are some additional things you might search? Like, what are some of your values? What are some of your beliefs? And kind of get some ideas there. From there, I move into needs, and that's something that I really, as I mentioned earlier, lean into Maslow's hierarchy of needs and really trying to align any of the needs that we come up with one of those stages on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so each of them should correspond back, again, just making sure that it's an actual need and not fabricating needs. That's something that I found a lot with personas, is it's like this, like a real person isn't thinking these things or needing these things. It's like contrived in order to fit the product or fit the software or whatever they're trying to do. So going the other direction, saying, okay, these are kind of foundational needs that every human has. How do we kind of connect those? And are there actually real areas where your product or service meets these needs and really helps them progress through them? You typically start at the bottom with physiological needs, and like, how do you actually help your customers throughout their journey, throughout their entire experience with you, being repeat customers or whatever else? How do you get them to that self-actualization at the very top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And then from there, I go into the obstacles. So once we have the needs, it's like, why have they not done these things? Like, what's holding them back? What's preventing them from accomplishing these things? And is that somewhere where your product or service comes in? Is it's actually helping them overcome these obstacles and overcome the barriers in order to kind of transcend the next stage of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And then that last bit was the touch points. And that's usually figuring out like, multi-channel, omni-channel, whatever you want to call it, like more and more, businesses, marketers are realizing the importance of that. And each customer has a unique experience. Like, they don't all come through the exact same pipeline. All of them don't come through SEO. All of them don't come through ads. All of them don't come through a newspaper or whatever else you're using. So thinking about each specific customer and their journey, it's like, okay, where are they starting? Where do they end up? And how do we optimize the entire process for that individual?
Right. Yeah. So going back a little bit, you mentioned for the psychographic part, kind of having a conversation with AI. And I wonder if you can provide some examples of the questions you're asking, because I think that there's a lot of marketers that have kind of gotten to the point of they're using ChatGPT to generate some content, write some social posts, help them write the newsletter. They've taken that first step, but they're not sure where to go from there. And I feel like this kind of gets into that next step of, we'll treat it as someone to bounce ideas off of, to ask questions of large data sets. What are you doing? What are you uploading? You mentioned uploading like, oh, here's some demographic information. Are you uploading other data sets? What kind of prompts are you using to ask it questions?
It's a great question. So I usually start with 2 documents at a minimum for kind of the brand strategy stuff in general. With pretty much all my clients, I do a discovery session where we go through all of their goals and we organize that into like revenue goals, their awareness goals, just like marketing, and then the processes that they need to actually pull that off. And then we also go into their creative directions. So it's things like, what is the culture you want to create? What's the look and feel? How do you want people to feel after they use your products or services? Some of the things that usually people kind of overlook and are like, it's kind of flying the sky. I don't know if this is going to like work or if it's necessary. Like, where's the money? And then the third big component of it is the personas. And what I include in that information is the 5 categories that I just went through. So the demographic, psychographic, needs, obstacles, and touch points. And I usually, and this is something I'm actually like experimenting around quite a bit with, is figuring out how to structure that information in order to feed it to, right now what I'm working with is like a GPT that I train specifically for each individual client. And so in the knowledge base, I'll grab that full PDF of our brand strategy document that has all the information about their personas and their goals and competitive analysis and all the things. And I load that into the GPT. I also have several like spreadsheets from the discovery exercises where we just have a list of like words and adjectives that they want to describe their voice and that they would generally describe their audience as, and I feed that as well. And then once I give it that information is where I start asking questions to see how accurate or on or off base it is. So I'll say, okay, role play is this persona. And then I ask a few questions. I'm like, all right, tell me about your background to get a sense of like, does it understand the demographic information? If there's something that's in there that's off, like for example, one of the weird ones I often get is if you put an age range, it'll say, I am between 35 and 45 years old. And it's like, no, let's like pick an age, like let's make this a real person. And so going through little details like that and kind of ironing things out and just asking additional questions. So then once I get to the psychographic, it's okay, where you hang out online, like what social media platforms do you use and why or why not? I also use these for informing search engine optimization. So one of my big pet peeves is the way that keyword research is starting to be done with AI. And a lot of times I just haven't gotten very good results. I'm in general not huge on keyword research tools. A lot of them just don't have enough data to be very accurate. And that's another limitation I'm starting to see with AI. But if you give it a persona and then you tell it to role play as that persona, and then you say, hey, you're early in the process, you're like problem unaware, what are the types of things that you would search if you're trying to solve this problem? And it can give you some ideas there. It's like, okay, you move further down. It's like, all right, now you're at the bottom of the funnel and you know what you want to buy. You're acting as this persona of what are the actual keywords you would search there. So it's really taking the approach of let it be a person, let it act as the persona. And then it's almost like asking your personas or asking your customers, what are they searching for? What are the things they're doing? And really going back and forth with those knowledge-based documents of like, okay, making sure it's accurate as I need. I just kind of tweak things, say, hey, I think you misunderstood this persona. Let's tweak that and kind of go from there.
Right. No, that's great. That's super helpful. And I think, a lot of people need to experiment with that kind of stuff and give that a try and understand where the limitations are or aren't with AI and understanding that kind of stuff and the data types of questions you can ask it that are going to be more accurate than others. Speaking of, SEO and AI, as an SEO person, are you thinking about or worried about, the a decline in the efficacy of SEO in the face of, chat bots and things like Perplexity and whatever Google decides to introduce, as a chat interface? Like, are you worried that that's a dying industry like some people are claiming, or are you just saying, well, it's still working, so I'm going to keep doing it,
Yeah, that's a great question. I've definitely seen all the doom and gloom and like, people heading for the hills. And I see it the same way as I guess a lot of other innovations that have happened. And with like also being a designer and have a background in design, like every couple of years there's something that threatens design.
Hmm.
And I feel like AI was like another big thing with image generators and like artists and creativity. I was like, is there gonna be, is that gonna be jeopardized? Ultimately, the way I see it, and I know it sounds super cliche, but that it is just another tool. And in terms of like Google with their search generative experiments or whatever they're calling it, I got like pretty early access to that and started keeping an eye on it. And there's definitely some areas I feel like it is a threat to SEO. And it's particularly what I'm finding anyway is with informational searches. It used to be, you could write a post to go for a specific answer target. And this was something that in the last several years had become pretty effective with the rise of featured snippets in Google. I'd gotten pretty good at like being able to target those featured snippets and win those. And it was a good way to just increase traffic and credibility and EEAT and all that good stuff. That's one of the areas I feel like is taking a hit simply because you can get the same kind of aggregated information from the search generative experience by asking these kind of questions that have a clear answer. Listicles are another one I feel like are getting threatened pretty badly.
I don't know if anybody should feel bad about listicles getting threatened, you know. Do we
It's
need
time.
another top 10?
Yep. Yep. And yeah, for a long time that had become like a hack for people, and just put like 2024 at the end and do
Yeah,
all these
yeah.
things and yada yada yada. And I think a lot of that is just I think the time for that is over. AI is always going to be like more timely. It doesn't really
Yep,
need the 2024, all that kind of stuff.
yep.
And it's just a quicker, more efficient way to get the information. At the same time, I'm noticing it creates a lot of opportunities. Whereas before we were trying to win the featured snippet, there's now competition to get in the results of like for generative or search generative
Mm.
experience of like whatever it's pulling from, trying to get in that list of articles because then it shows the links below that. And something that I've been doing quite a bit is working with like creating SEO content that kind of corresponds to some of these answers. And then specifically focusing for backlinks on the web pages that are actually used as the sources within the generative results. So it'll give you those sources, and a lot of times it'll pull like listicles and things like that. So if you can then get on those listicles, that's again good for the brand for the company if you're showing up anyway. Again, it's just bad for the listicle people because they're
Yep,
not getting that traffic anymore.
yep. Yeah, no, I think I've seen a couple conversations around this, and I think there's some things, some questions is, how will these chat interfaces end up showing those citations? How prominently will they be featured? From Perplexity to Google's chat interface, like where's that actually going to end up? Because it's all super early still. And then two, how will users behave? Will they click? What percent are going to click on citations? Or is it about just getting your brand named in the result? Like that's the real goal, and it becomes a brand awareness play more than anything. There's so many questions around that right now, and it's a pretty interesting space. Yeah. So for e-commerce, because you focus a lot of your time on e-commerce, what are some of the other things that you're doing right now that are still working? I've seen a lot of people actually have talked about getting hit with their SEO traffic just even in the last few months, with a number of these updates that have been happening. Are you seeing a big impact across the board? Are you seeing any things that are helping mitigate that? Where's your head at?
Yeah, no, good question. I would say, fortunately for my clients and my sites, I have not seen a big hit in that. And partially that's just due to the nature of the businesses and the type of work that I typically do. So I'll occasionally go higher in the funnel, but a big part of my approach is bottoms up SEO. So I actually start at the bottom of the funnel with the terms that are most likely to get conversions. So that's like branded keywords and really long form, very specific, like long tail keywords that are like super specific to a certain location or a certain product type or like the product and the benefits. Really ones that have less competition, but a lot more conversions basically. They're the ones that have the highest buying intent. And those are the ones that at least I'm finding so far that generative search and all of that has like no effect on. It's like ultimately if you're looking to buy a product and somebody's ranking high for that product, that it's it's more informational. I
Yep.
think eventually it could get there where there's shopping integrated, and I'm sure there's plans for that. But currently, that seems like an area that is relatively safe. And kind of like you said earlier, I am seeing it kind of as another channel that people are using as another step to SEO. So like if they see certain results in the generative experience thing, then they might see a brand name in there, and then they'll go and search for that brand name. And so that's a big part of like, I'm shocked at how often it's overlooked of just ranking for your own brand terms and those bottom of funnel terms, or if you're launching a new product or campaign, getting the page up and running, getting it ranking for that brand name or that term so that by the time people actually start looking for it and typing it in, you pop up there.
Yep.
So I do think that that's a big area where, yeah, people are just kind of going in, they see the overall list of results depending on what they're looking at, and then they might see some of those citations, and then they might not even necessarily click on it. And I've seen this with ads and social as well. They'll just pop open, their search and say, all right, let me put in that brand name and go straight to the source. So yeah, sorry, I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
no, yeah, that was great. That definitely. And I think, yeah, but branded search, like your strategy can't just be I'll pay to show my ads on my own brand name. Like that's that's a very poor strategy. The other thing, so putting on your CRO hat and thinking about data and attribution, what in your space, what does your tool stack kind of look like for handling this data? There's as simple as Shopify's analytics and then Google Analytics, and then like where do you go? What are you using? What's most important to you?
So definitely the analytics that are built within whatever the CRM we're using. Sometimes it's like a third-party booking software. Sometimes it is Shopify. Sometimes it's WooCommerce, just depending on what I'm working on. So whatever the main source of truth for like revenue is one of my big sources that I try to pull from, and usually trying to find whatever is the most accurate. I also use Google Analytics quite a bit, but I mainly use that just for web traffic and like SEO work and kind of seeing how pages are performing rather than for revenue. Depending on the business, like sometimes it's extremely accurate, which shows up in terms of conversions or monetization in Google Analytics, depending on how many steps there are and if it's a third party platform or whatever they're using for their actual conversions. And so those are two big ones, whatever the actual platform is, and then Google Analytics. I'm huge on Google Search Console, so if I can avoid it, I typically try not to use keyword research tools. I use a few here and there if I need to. Like the main one I use is SEMrush, but I've used Moz, I've used Ahrefs, Ask the Public, all that good stuff. But I usually just use them as kind of a temperature check and really for more of the information around like domain authority or like keyword difficulty and things like that. Rather than for a lot of my keyword research. I actually do that probably not the most efficient way, and I'm hoping AI can help, but just doing the searches and looking at what it also recommends and what are people also searching and seeing what actual results are there, because that's the way I found that you actually see what's happening in the SERPs real time. And then in terms of more complex data, for all the web data, I usually use like Looker Studio to visualize it, and that's something that's really helpful for my clients because a lot of times they just, looking at a spreadsheet or a bunch of numbers, it's just like nonsense to them. And then I'm a big Tableau user. So I'll usually, for anything that's more complex, I import all of that into Tableau and I use that to make dashboards and all of that. I haven't experimented around with their AI yet, but I'm actually really excited for that.
Yeah, the AI on the data side, that's going to be fun. The better it gets.
Absolutely.
We've played around a lot with ThoughtSpot as well, and their AI chart builder has been pretty great. We've been very thrilled with it. So check
Okay.
that out. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take the recommendation. Wow.
um, the when you're looking at you talked about doing an A/B test. Looking at the data, coming up with a hypothesis, coming up with an A/B test to prove or disprove it. What does that look like for you? Because I think there's a lot of people who maybe don't have a lot of experience in this space. They hear the word A/B test and they think change the color of the button. That's right where their heads go. So talk to me about what does A/B test mean to you?
Yeah. So, kind of like I mentioned earlier, I tend to use psychology as kind of a framework in order to kind of, I don't know, kind of as a guiding light in order to figure out what to pay attention to and what to test for in A/B tests. Because exactly like you said, I've seen some interesting A/B testing. And what I found like is a very common mistake and trap is like not finding one thing for each test to like hone in on. It's like you can perform multiple tests over time that like change multiple variables, but it's like one variable for each test. And usually what I'll use to figure out what that one variable is like I mentioned, it's called the 6 Myths of psychology. So one of them, for example, is like language. And so if I'm trying to figure out, I'll try to inform this with data. This also affects a lot with like SEO and click-through rates in terms of like meta titles and things like that. And so figuring out for the audience, and sometimes depending on the location, is there a different word that they use that's preferable to another audience? And then actually testing that. So even if it's describing the same thing, but there's just one or two words that are changed, or just like a change in the phrasing or the terminology around that term, then that's one of the things that I'll try to test. So I'm like, okay, is this audience, when we're sending out emails, did they click more if we put this term or if we put that term? It's like, okay, after we get that, then we can test out like images. So another one of the factors is visual attention. So it's like, what are people paying attention to in terms of what they're seeing? What stops them from scrolling? So we might look at that. And then another is like memory. Do they have a frame of reference? Are they familiar with your products? Are they familiar with your competitors? So if you put something in there that kind of relates to something that they would have to remember from another experience, how does that impact things? One of the ones that's harder to test is like decision making, but that can be things like, all right, are they driven by discounts? Are they driven by buying in bulk? Are they driven by like last minute timely purchase? And having that as a factor to test. So, okay, maybe one of them goes out when there's only a little time before the actual sale ends, one goes out further in advance. So checking things like that about, okay, what actually impacts their decision making, and really just focusing on one of those elements at a time and kind of building on that.
Yeah, that's great. I like that as a framework, and it gives some stronger scaffolding for you to construct your tests on that are actually going to have impact. Because you might get lucky and changing the color of the button really did impact it, but that's pretty rare, right? I think like that's not going to be a major change. It's going to be a couple percentage points at very, very most.
A lot of times what I see is people will change like the entire ad or the entire email. It's like, we don't know what caused the change there now. It's like, yes, this one performed better, but we can't learn or apply anything from that because the image changed, the button changed, the language changed, like the format changed, and everything changed. It's like there is no control group. There's no like, it's all variables.
Yep, exactly. So you don't know why, and there's only one way to get to that why. So you talked a lot about using AI for personas and kind of asking questions and building around that. Are there any other ways that you're using AI in your day-to-day?
Yes. So, as I kind of mentioned before, some of the teams that I work with have less marketing resources, and one of the biggest challenges I found is content creation. So sometimes it's like we have this big, elaborate, crazy, omni-channel, strategy that's what's needed, but we kind of have to scale that down depending on the client. And with that, actually producing that content in quantity, but not just quantity, but quality. And so one of the issues that I've had quite a bit is kind of somebody gets something out of an AI tool and is like, hey, look at this great copy or look at this great whatever. And it's like,
Great's not the word I would use.
Not how I would characterize it. And so with that, that's where I'm finding building out a GPT for a customer and training it on their data specifically. So like their brand strategy, their discovery documents. I'll take all of their product information and I've started formatting that into like just a simple Google sheet. And then I feed it that as well. So it has like pricing and value propositions and like all the different caveats and all of that kind of stuff. And with that, I've actually had really good luck in terms of making SEO content. So what I'll usually do, so I still do the actual like SEO optimizing part of it. I do the keyword research and I'll structure all of the headings. So I'll say, okay, here's the meta title, here's the H1, here's the H2s, here's the H3, and I'll structure it out and I'll feed that into ChatGPT. And then I ask it to fill in the paragraphs basically. And with that approach, I've actually found that working really well. It'll go in, it takes everything from the knowledge base. If I tell it to act like a certain role for one of the personas, if I tell it this article is for a certain persona, I say, hey, it's for this audience, it's for this location, it's for this product line or this service. And then I actually feed it the actual structure for the headings that I want to use, then it'll just go in and fill in the paragraphs, and then I can take that and me and the client can kind of revise that. So by taking that approach, it's just, I've gotten far better results than just saying, hey, write an article or like anything like that, just trying to get it to do it from scratch by giving it, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of scaffolding and like parameters and like what is good and what is bad. I also do a lot of iterating. So after we get an article, we'll get it out, we'll edit it, we'll add in links, we'll add in like entities and all of that kind of stuff. And then I get it back to the GPT and I say, hey, here's the updated article, analyze it, let me know what you noticed in terms of what we changed and apply that to the next round. And so each time I do that, I just grab the article, I put it back in, and then I started to also give it I have like a trigger word. So the one that I set, and I just gave it a series of instructions in order to do this with, I think it's like 7 or 8 different steps it goes through. They said, if I say, let's write an article, then it asks me a series of questions. And so I'll say, okay, let's write an article. It says, okay, who is the article for? And I write in the audience. It says, okay, is it for a specific location or a specific product? And I tell it that, and it references the database. And then we kind of go from there. So it'll go through each of these steps based on this kind of protocol in order to get a finished product. And eventually it asks me, okay, I think I'm good to go. I understand the audience. I've got the information. Can you give me the outline? And that's where I handed all of the H1 tags. And then it goes in and actually fills in the rest of the article. And I've gotten like pretty good results with that.
Nice. No, that's great. That's a really good process. And, we've definitely seen some of the same things where if you set it up right, give it the right context, the output is significantly better. And I encourage people to go and just experiment with that because it's really easy to experiment with that too. There's no excuse not to do that these days. I know we're all strapped for time, but this is the future, people. Let's use the new tools before you get left behind.
Absolutely. And it's like, ultimately, it's such a time saver because, like, yeah, finding writers for all these articles or like doing it myself or doing any other option, trying to get the client to do them. Like, sometimes it's just those aren't viable options or put deadlines. It's just going to take too long. So this has really been a game changer and it's really saving time. Like, within a couple of weeks, we can get several high quality articles up and running. And I know there's a lot of fear around that because Google has definitely hammered AI content, but it's not actually AI content that they're hammering. It's spam and not useful content.
Bad content is what is the enemy. Nobody cares if it's AI or not, if it's good.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I'm definitely finding that. And then, sorry, I wasn't sure if you had another question, but another area.
Go for it.
Cool. Another area I'm finding really helpful to explore is review sentiment analysis. So just grabbing all of your Google or TripAdvisor or whatever you use for reviews, grabbing all of them and plugging them into the GPT and then analyzing it for sentiment. So like I'll say, okay, can you organize these into positive and negative sentiment? Can you tell me overall based on our personas, does this align with our personas? Can you identify some of our personas in the reviews based on the things that they're talking about? Based on this, can you tell what our audience values? Like, again, what are the things that impact their decisions? Are they talking about like sustainability in their reviews? Are they talking about proximity in their reviews? Are they talking about price in the reviews? Like what actually matters to them? And AI is really good at like taking a bunch of sometimes unstructured data and finding the patterns and kind of comparing that back to a brand strategy and kind of seeing, okay, in terms of that gap analysis and stuff, okay, these were the goals. Is the sentiment actually working out that way based on what customers are actually saying? Like, can we start to tie in what they actually value into the content based on the actual reviews? So doing that sentiment analysis is another thing I like definitely recommend and has really been a game changer.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. That's a good like 201 level type of analysis for people to experiment with. We recorded for one of our other podcast series an episode several weeks ago now on how to use GPT for sheets to test out different prompts and test out their stability and accuracy and that sort of thing. But that same sort of tool works for this, where if you can get anything into a CSV, anything to a sheet, whether that's a bunch of reviews, customer data, anything like that, then you can categorize and analyze at scale. right? You can classify all those. This persona matches, or this person matches this persona, drag it across 100 reviews, and then say positive or negative, drag that across the same 100 reviews. Now you have a brand new data set that tells you all the people who are this persona are happy with us, and all the people that are that persona are mad at us. What's
Yep.
going on here?
No, that's a great point. So yeah, it's not always just finding what's good, and a lot of times with the reviews, especially with analyzing the bad ones and the lower star reviews that are out there. But a lot of times that's a big source of insight. It's like, where are you falling short? Like, who's angry at you? Who wasn't very happy, and how can you do to rectify that? And how does that tie back to your goals and your strategy and all of that kind of stuff? Should you reconsider a persona, or we just need to target them in a different way? So no, that's a great point.
Yeah. So we're coming up on time here. This has been an amazing conversation. How I always like to close it out is, do you have any recommendations for the audience? Books, newsletters, podcasts, etc. Anything come to mind?
Oh, absolutely. So one I always like to shout out, The Future, Chris Do. That is, it's mainly aimed at creatives and designers, but he's starting to do more with like helping business-minded people learn the creative side of things. And just, yeah, somebody that I think is really awesome, making really great content. The book Meta Skills by Marty Neumeier is another big one that it was kind of ahead of its time the way that I see it, but I think it helps prepare for a lot of the skill sets that are needed in the AI era, and kind of systems thinking and thinking big picture and how things all come together and all of that kind of stuff. One of my favorite podcasts, it's kind of old now, but How I Built This, just
That's a good one.
entrepreneurial business.
Yeah.
Love that one. In terms of some additional like marketing podcasts and stuff and resources for SEO, the Martech podcast is one of my favorites. I like Voices of Search. That's another good one. And then Income School is all about content creation and SEO. And then some of the stuff that I mentioned in terms of psychology came from several books. And so some of those are Designing for How People Think, Don't Make Me Think, which is a classic, and then Laws of UX are some of the big ones.
Nice. That's a treasure trove of recommendations.
Awesome. Hopefully it's helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon. This has been great. This has been really fun, and I think people are going to get a lot of value out of it. So thanks for taking the time.
Oh, I appreciate it, Sean. And yeah, really happy to be here. And yeah, just thank you for the interview.